You're listening to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at halsparks.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn puss-faced little pimpstick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
So welcome to the show. Joining us right now from Kiev is our dear friend Philip Ittner, who's live in Ukraine right now. And Johnny Million is with us as well. He'll be looking into the questions that the chat will be bringing up. And I've got a couple of things, Phil, if I may, that I think are sort of, crucial to what's going on presently. Not the least, and we'll talk about like cluster ammunition and all that stuff in a moment as well. But what do you make of the fact that Prigozhin seems to be traipsing all over Russia?
Yeah.
How is that possible?
We've talked about this. He is still of use to Vladimir Putin. There is no way on God's green earth that Prigozhin would be not in jail or still drawing breath, for that matter,
Right.
if Vladimir Putin didn't want it that way. So, all of this one of the things that's problematic about him traipsing all around Russia, or at least reportedly traipsing all around Russia. I know there were sightings in St. Petersburg, but the problem for that is that he's openly openly flouting the agreement that was brokered that he would stay in Belarus. That's problematic because it kind of undermines the power of the central government in Moscow. But
You think?
it's again what you and I have spoken about so many times.
Right.
He is a weapon that Putin is going to use in the coming tension and the storm that is coming, the battles that are going to come internally within the power structure in Moscow, because when they lose this war, it's going to be a shattering blow to the power elite in Moscow, and indeed to Russians' sense of identity and self.
I like the
he's there for a reason, Hal.
Yeah, how does it not to the rest of the world? How to the rest of the world? How does it not look like you just you caught the Unabomber and then you said you filled his gas tank and let him drive away? How is it that you arrest Timothy McVeigh and because I mean it's an apt descriptive. And you just go.
It's not a one-to-one analogy, but I get what you're saying with that. The difference is that in this case, you would be you wouldn't be letting him free, Timothy McVeigh. You would be going, hey, that van you got packed with explosives. We'll just put that in play and let everybody else shake in their boots because they don't know where that van is eventually going to be. Parked up maybe in front of their building, that sort of thing. He has appropriated the mad dog version of Prigozhin that he's going to, I believe strongly that he's going to capitalize on Prigozhin and use him against the other power structures within Moscow that might be coming at him. So, they're all going to start fighting one another.
I agree with your assessment. I'm just amazed at the ham-handed BS-ery of the whole thing. It is just I like what you get, the return on investment in that kind of behavior or that kind of play seems so weak by comparison, especially if you're on the back foot and other people are like, we might have to knock this guy off and take his job. And the only thing you're going is the guy that tried to kill me or was planning on killing me, I might sick him on you because he follows orders so well. Like it's and again, Lukashenko.
Well, he never really said he was coming for Putin. There was a couple of kind of
tomorrow. He said
there was going to be a new leadership. He said there was going to be new leadership.
Right.
Which is, yes, obviously, but by and large, he doesn't attack Putin. And he can walk that back. That one statement he can walk back.
Yeah.
And the relationship.
It's tough, guy. It's locker room talk. It's, you know what I mean? It's locker
Or
room
it's or it's like, I'm saying this because I'm warning Putin that there's going to be new leadership if he doesn't clean house. I was the best intentions, boss. I only said that because I was trying to warn you, sort of thing. I mean, that's just one scenario where he can walk back that statement. But by and large, he has attacked everybody on the strata below Putin because the Tsar cannot be held responsible. It's really important that the center of gravity holds, and so it can't be. If the Tsar only knew, right? Is the historical reference that Russians have said for centuries. It's that it can't be the guy in charge because he is the great leader. He is
Right.
In the Tsarist times, he was given power by God directly. In Soviet times, it was because it was the great.
Yeah, I understand how, but there's got to be a limit on how well that works. The same thing is happening of like the mandate from heaven, which is what Xi Jinping operates on. And they used to be that if you had two kind of major calamities, the idea was that the public would turn on the emperor, and then later the leader of the Communist Party, because he no longer had the mandate of heaven. Well, there's been like 6 now. And Xi Jinping's not buying into that. I mean, he's thrown all of Chinese culture in the dustbin of history, including that part especially. So, and there's definitely there's a point where you either have to face that music or totally just say doesn't apply to me, period. And like, I've only seen like Lukashenko's speech that he gave this week, where he came out and basically said the Wagner guys found no resistance anywhere, which in and of itself is, again, in the age of Trump, everything that used to run yeah.
Well, no, this is another problem that Putin does have with Prigozhin, and that is that he has a lot of popularity. I mean, if you watched all the monitors coming out of media, Russian media, even they are debating amongst themselves whether or not, he got a raw deal, whether or not he's a hero, or whether or not he's a villain, or whether he's a crook, or there's all sorts of. You see the fracturing happening within Moscow because of course, all media is state-run media, so that stuff isn't going on the air, without vetting. So, there's clearly divides that are, and this again plays into what I think is happening or is going to imminently happen, and that is that these cracks are going to get wider. They're going to get more pronounced. They're going to be more visible. There will be tensions between the various powers, the technocrats, the oligarchs, the intelligence services, the armed forces. All of these different groups are going to start, kind of squaring off. Now, whether or not they might still pay allegiance to Putin, but it's gonna get nutty.
Right.
And Russians aren't going to like it because they don't like the chaos. They don't want to return to the 90s when this kind of stuff was happening all the time.
Right.
There were disparate groups all over during the 90s, and it was because Yeltsin was such a weak leader. Well, now Putin is he's a damaged leader. Let's say that. He's not weak yet, but he is wounded. And and again, I use the analogy oftentimes, and not just in this circumstance. I've said this about Russian power structures all the time, is that once it's that thing of a guy swimming and he gets a cut on a reef and a little cut of blood, and start to circle, and they start to take bites out of one another until the dominant is determined, and then they go for the diver.
I had I have to say, Phil, for the length of this war, you have been saying you have been talking about how the sort of the hockey stick aspect of Russian diplomacy and internal workings, where it's flat for a long time and then everything happens all at once, and then once it starts to cascade, it's usually a couple of months and everything is thrown into,
The
chaos.
90s were a little bit different, but yes.
Yeah, but even still, it qualifies in the scope of world history. Even a couple of years is a hockey stick in that regard. And
Yes.
in I have seen increasingly over the last 3 weeks a rise in the number of voices saying precisely that. What used to be moderating voices about what Russia can do when this is over, maybe they can blah, 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 will they become a part of are all now talking about, hey, remember in 91? And then, of course, when the Tsar fell, where everything was humping along for a long time and almost invisible, and then the entire thing just came crashing down all at once. And saying what you're saying, I've seen that tide tick in that direction, and that's why we have you on, my brother. And
Maybe it's because I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
People should listen to me.
That's right. And people have questions for you, and we will deal with some of those on our
lucky audience members. You get this enormous brain with all
That's
these
right.
experiences in this
Yes.
part of the world. So listen to what I'm telling.
Yeah, 3.5 of them.
Hubris.
And so
do we want to go? Well, look, before we
gotta
go
take
to
a break.
questions, I just want to. Oh, we got to go to a break?
Yeah,
I'll
well,
do
we
it
got
on
to
the
take a
other
break.
side.
We'll do the questions on the other side as well. So get your questions to Johnny Million, and we'll be back right after this. Don't forget, twitch.tv/It's Johnny Million. You should subscribe. He's the only person who ever raids me. It's so sweet. So sweet.
I'm starting to understand why I don't have as much time to talk during my segments, because Devin's bumpers are 3 minutes long.
You want a quick promo, Hal? You got a quick promo, Hal.
Welcome back to the Hal Johnny's Radio Program. Mega World Chicago Sports Talk WCPT. Woo! Yeah!
That's right. That's how we work around here. Philip Ittner's still with us, and you wanted to say something before we get into some of the questions that are coming up.
Yeah, before we get into questions, there are a couple of things that happened today. Sadly, a very grim milestone, but still a milestone worth mentioning. Today is the 500th day of this war.
Right.
This war that was supposed to be a 3-day blitzkrieg by Putin is now into its 500th day, sadly.
Right.
And secondly, those who have not seen it, to mark the 500th day of this war, President Zelensky got in a little ditty motorboat, went 20 miles into the Black Sea to Snake Island, which, folks, it might remember that's where the Ruski Korabli Dinahui, the resistance to there was a
you can't quote it in English.
There.
I think we
say it in English.
Yeah, right.
I think we can skate by with the Russian,
Mhm.
but there was an army base there, and a Russian warship basically threatened it, and they told them to where to get off.
Go pound sand. Yeah,
and it's a very famous incident at the beginning of the war that gave a lot of people a morale boost and to show that kind of resistance. Zelensky showing up on the island today, the 500th day anniversary of the beginning of this full-scale war, is a huge morale boost. He laid a bouquet of flowers. They put a bouquet in the waters of the Black Sea. He made a speech that was the video. It's deeply moving because it's not about him. The entire speech is, I am marking this day, the 500th day, and thanking the people of Ukraine, basically the people of Ukraine, all the security forces, all the armed forces, not about him at all. I mean, yes, obviously there was a video team with him and they went there to stand on that ground, but he did do it. And that was a risky thing to do. So, say what you want. It wasn't just a photo op. And then the fact that he didn't make it about himself. He made it all about, like, we're going to win. This island will never be occupied by Russia again. And thank you. It's not about me. It's about you. We're all in this together. It's deeply moving speech. And I think there are English subtitled things out there by now. I know I've seen a dubbed one, but it's deeply moving. It was a heck of a thing to wake up to this morning. But those two things are worth mentioning. The cluster bomb stuff, if we get to it, great. But let's get into the questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plans for the summer, and what do the local kids in Ukraine have to look forward to?
My plan for the summer is to stay here and keep my eyes glued and try on the situation here and try my very best to keep Ukraine in the front pages and in the in the thoughts of people back home and around the world. So that's my intention for the summer. Kids, I mean, kids are kids. I mean, they can't go swimming in the Black Sea because it's mined, so that's a pity. But
Right.
they're going to be kids. They're going to as best they can. And in all seriousness, actually, I talked to a lot of Ukrainian parents, and one of the primary things that Ukrainian parents are doing and have done since the beginning of this war is try to maintain as much normalcy as possible for these kids.
Right.
So they literally are taking them to summer camps and trying to keep them distracted and stuff like that. So yeah.
Cool.
Got another?
Yeah.
I sure do. This one is a real heavy hitter from Mr. Spock. They want to know if you can juggle.
No, I can't. I never learned
All
that
right.
skill.
Asked and answered.
I can poorly. That's, I mean, like
I can juggle really poorly.
Oh,
I can
nice.
throw 3 things in the air
and watch them fall.
and watch them fall.
Sure. Okay.
So this is a question from Jay Fernston. Do you think that Wagner 2.0 is currently in development?
I mean, maybe. Yeah, sure. I mean, a Wagner without Prigozhin, maybe. A Wagner that is, more integrated with the Ministry of Defense. That's also possible. I mean, I saw my buddy over at the BBC, Steve Rosenberg, did a whole report about a camp that has been built in Belarus that can house 5,000 soldiers. So, is that Prigozhin's Praetorian Guard so that he can't get arrested? I don't know. But we'll have to wait and see. I mean, a lot of those guys are going to be snatched up by the military proper as it is right now. A lot of this depends on what Prigozhin does, and where Prigozhin goes, his Wagner group will follow because he has a very fanatical following within. So we shall see. I think there's a distinct possibility that that there'll be a 2.0. How different it'll be from the original, we'll have to wait and see.
Right.
Awesome. All right, I've got a question from Tammy. Has the dip in Putin's political testosterone slowed the outflux of military-age men from Russia?
Well, they were just snatching up construction guys this week.
Well, okay. So has his weakness resulted in? Say that again. Fewer
Has it
people leaving.
slowed people leaving of military age from Russia?
I would be surprised if that was the case. I think everybody who wanted to get out has already gotten out. All the people who could afford to get out have already gotten out. They've clamped down on men of fighting age, which is increasingly being bumped up. I think it's in its 50s now. They can't. They have it now so that they don't have to present you with their conscription papers, which used to be a thing where you had to physically go and give them conscription papers. Now they can just send it to you in an SMS, and once you have that, you can't leave the country. So they're doing all they can to stop people from leaving as it is. The massive numbers that we saw at the first mobilization, we're not going to see that again because anybody who wanted to get out already got out.
I have a question for you. Are you on Threads?
Not yet, but I will be. I'll get on Threads soon.
I signed up on Threads. I am on there. People can find me. I think it's just like Hal Sparks at threads.net is how you get there or whatever, or you just look me up on there. The nice thing about the fact that I'm verified in Instagram, it kept my verification on there as well. So I'm on Threads. It's a lot of fun. And I will say, curiously enough, it took a little while, if you'll notice in your sharing of stuff from your from apps and whatnot, it took a little while for the Twitter thing to be a possibility, so you could share articles and pictures and that kind of stuff in the sharing thing. The Threads one was instantaneous. The minute it came out, that, if you'll notice, it's now amongst your possible shares if you sign up. which is like that's you can see that there is a vested interest in people watching Elon Musk squirm at the very least. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
So-
I'm gonna get. I'll get on it. I'll get on. I'll need to transfer all my stuff, but that's okay.
It's yeah.
fine.
If you have an Instagram account, you don't have to. You can just port it straight over. Anyways, we have another question. We got like another minute before the break. We have a quickie, Johnny.
Yeah. This is from Philip Dilberg. I'm hearing an echo on myself all of a sudden.
I'm sorry.
Same here.
Haven't the Russians repaired the bridge between Crimea and Ruskiland?
That is the Kerch Strait Bridge. They have. They fixed it by and large. I think rail is still damaged, but you can drive across it. It's the problem with the Kerch Bridge is that it's going to quickly fall under Ukrainian artillery very soon, especially if they get their longer range munitions from the United States or other NATO. And the second thing about the Kerch Bridge is that ultimately it's going to fall into the sea. We know it. If we know it, certainly the Russians know it. The strait is all silt, and engineering cannot handle it.
Mhm.
Eventually, it will fall into the sea. It may not happen. It may not happen for 5 years. It may not happen for 10 years. Heck, it may not happen for 20 years. But ultimately, it's going to fall into the sea. So the bridge is not a solution. Ergo, therefore, the war.
Cool. We're going to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. Follow Philip Ittner on Twitter until he's on Threads at Philip Ittner, 1L, 2 T's. And, of course, our dear friend Johnny Million. Follow him at Johnny Million in both or either. No, just one. You're on Twitter right now, right? You're not on Threads yet? That is something. Oh, good. As you do. We'll be back right after this.
Attention, stop what you're doing. Because we're coming back to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
They went a little crazy with it, and I appreciate it.
Check
Now
for me,
let's
Johnny
get back
Million.
with Hal Sparks radio program, Mega
Check, check,
Worldwide.
check.
I think that should do it. I think we should be all right.
Am I back? Let us know,
Yep.
chat.
Yep, chat. I think he's okay. I think I've fixed it. It's a weird thing. It's one of those things where apparently I can only listen to 2 out of 3 voices on the thing at the same time, and it's you, Phil, and WCPT. And if we add, once one gets added, somebody gets shoved out the door. So I think I found a workaround. So we should be all right. And that said, we've got more questions from our chat room at infotainmentwars.com.
Sure do.
And, of course, twitch.tv/HalSparks. Don't forget, patreon.com/HalSparks is a great way to support the show. And then, of course, we do have on the, I've got a regular show 5 days a week in the afternoons, 3 p.m. Pacific time. And then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I got a morning show. And Philip joins me on the Wednesday show for the second hour so that we can kind of pick up because there's so much news happening. Now, after you, Johnny Mayton. After you.
After you. No, after you. All right, so Tim is asking, is Sybil Erdogan saying Ukraine belongs in NATO significant in any way, especially with Putin scheduled to visit Turkey?
Erdogan, you mean? Yeah.
Oh, Erdogan.
Probably.
Oh,
yeah.
Terep Erdogan. I mean, yeah, it is. It's a big deal because Turkey is also, by the way, a Black Sea power. So a lot of this is about who controls power in the Black Sea. So they might be playing a bit of a game there as well. The fact that Turkey has often been a spoiler within NATO. I mean, certainly they were with the recent members of NATO and that process. So the fact that that Erdogan is greenlighting Ukraine going into NATO is, potentially very big deal. As far as how it's going to affect relations between Turkey and Russia or Erdogan and Putin, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But Erdogan is already embarrassed Putin, on the global stage more than once. There's no love lost between the two men. Erdogan's gonna do what Erdogan is gonna do, No, the short answer, I guess, at the end of the day is no. I don't think it's going to significantly change the relationship between Russia and Turkey, and I think it's a big deal for Ukraine.
Right. Agreed. And I think they get a little bit of street cred in the world for being one of the holdouts in that regard, which is it reminds me of a little bit about how all the talk about France signing up with China, and France was, on China's side all of a sudden and all this stuff. And then when France finally says nope to China, it it was hard for, the regular critics to ignore that. They could, on other countries that have been kind of, hawkish against China for a good long while, including the United States, they could kind of write it off. But China built, built a little room for itself diplomatically, in the same way that Turkey has done that with its attitude towards Russia. It's been kind of playing footsie so much with Putin that the minute it says no, it has a lot more weight amongst these other countries.
And just as a quick addendum, you also have to kind of look at the history between Russia and Turkey that goes back, a good 200 years. They've fought a number of wars. They have very serious conflicting geopolitical interests, especially when it comes to the Black Sea. So, even if Erdogan and Putin were best buddies, there's still a geopolitical conflict there, and a history of conflict there. So,
yeah, not on the level that Kazakhstan is growing, but pretty close. So let's grab another question, Johnny Million.
Sure. I've got, let's see, from Ed's 3D Tech. Can you ask Philip if Russia has less than 25% artillery left?
Well, I mean, okay, so I can't answer that because, those are some murky numbers. I do know that the Russians have switched their entire economy and their industrial base to a war footing. So they are churning out a lot of artillery, but they're also going through a lot of artillery. And in addition to that, they're pulling up stockpiles that are very old, and so their dud rate is big. That's a big deal. And then in addition to that, they don't have access to computer chips, which is so important for smart munitions, which are really important to have on the modern battlefield. 25% less than their artillery say that they started with. I'd be slightly surprised if that was accurate, just because they are flooding the zone and they have put themselves on a war footing. But it's still not. it's still not gonna be as effective as it needs to be when it comes up against, in my opinion, up against Ukraine's, armed forces, which are they fight smarter, not harder. It's keeping your soldiers alive is a very important thing, so that they are effective in the next battle. That's why they love the Bradley fighting vehicle so much, because of the survivability of being in a Bradley, which I can personally attest to from an incident in Baghdad, which I think I've already told on this channel before. I am alive today because of a Bradley fighting vehicle. Ukrainian soldiers are learning that lesson this summer just as well. So the Russians disproportionately focus on artillery, and artillery is nothing to be scoffed at, obviously, clearly, but it's not the end all be all. So I stand with the Ukrainians and their military doctrine before I stand with the Russians, because the Russians are just basically the two pillars with a couple of fringe elements. For the Russians is artillery and just masses of conscripts, and that's how they fight their wars. And whereas, this side of the equation, they're training people properly, they're trying to get them the best equipment, they're trying to keep the survivability up, they're trying to get their lethality up so that they, hit what they're striking at. Obviously, the cluster bomb thing is going to be another element for the Ukrainians.
Right.
But I can't put a number on how much the Russians have diminished their stockpiles, but they are not doing well either. It's tough on their side too. clearly, because we see their effectiveness. And
they also don't have as many options for replenishment as Ukraine does, because Ukraine has a lot of different countries supplying with them with a lot of stuff, both overtly and covertly. And Russia does as well, but fewer sources. So, while they're, it's almost as if they traded these nukes to Belarus in exchange for other stuff, in the same way that they drove trucks out of there just recently. So we shall see what we shall see. Again, the chances of Ukraine ever running out of munitions genuinely is zero, because the U.S. and NATO and the European Union are of one mind to protect that place from this point forward, period, because they can see the end in sight. Russia, on the other hand, does not, and they don't have bottomless pockets. And China and Iran both are kind of leaning towards the exit more and more.
And the DPRK is not going to give them their stockpile, because the DPRK is deeply paranoid and thinks the South is coming any day. So they're going to limit their.
Yeah, they could have thought this was a plot between South Korea and Russia to try and empty.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they're that kind of crazy in the DPRK. So I don't think they're just going to hand over everything that they've got, because they literally do think, like the Pakistanis do with India, that my enemy is coming every single day and I have to be ready for it. So they don't have a lot of sources, the Russians, for replenishment.
And they're shrinking all the time. We have probably time for one more question before we have to take our break.
Okay.
What do we got there, Johnny Million?
All right, here's a quickie from Jeremiah. Who's going to take over Russia after Putin?
Well, that's the other.
That's a quick one, huh? Oh, you sly dog, you.
Susan Sarandon, not a joke.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry.
Ask and answer.
There you go. I don't know. That's what that's what's coming up. That's what's happening in Moscow, is the positioning for who comes after Putin. No Russian leader survives losing Ukraine and potentially Crimea and can stay in power. It's going to be the worst military defeat that Russia has suffered, probably. It'll be a high watermark within its history. Yeah,
right.
Almost never. I mean, this is a huge blow.
Yeah. And in its current existence, by the way, I don't know why some countries form new out of old land, and somehow they get credit for everything that happened on that land beforehand, even though there's no continuity between their actual policy or any that stuff, which seems very strange. There's no direct continuity between governance styles between Russia and the former Soviet Union in that regard, except for, power grabbing, which is not one thing you could say is unique to the USSR in that regard. The weird thing is that for all the imperialism talk and the endless war stuff that RFK and his ilk are throwing around about the U.S. helping Ukraine, I'd like to remind everyone that Russia started a war in Chechnya, and they're still there. Russia started a war in Georgia. They're still there. Russia started a war in Ukraine. They're still there. For all the whereas we are bugging out of everywhere. And so have the UK and other places. We have no interest in staying, and certainly not making satellite countries out of these places. The Russians make no bones about their imperialist plans, and neither do China right now. But somehow they're allowed to just beat their chest about it on Channel 1. But but we've got to go with I guess something that happened in the 1700s. If
I may, just real quick about that. If folks are really worried about endless wars, then they should be supporting a resolution to this conflict, because both the First and the Second World War stemmed from this question of who controls the territory between the North Sea, the Adriatic, and the Black Sea. That triangle where empires have conflicted for centuries. That caused both the First World War and the Second World War. If we don't want to see a third world war, let's stop this conflict here now, ratify these borders, give sovereignty to Ukraine, and this stretch of Europe, that question will end, and no more world wars will stem from this location.
Well, and for the record, none of these people care about quote unquote endless wars when it's Russia in Syria, or it's Russia in Africa, or it's Russia in Georgia, or it's Russia in Chechnya. These are forever ongoing brutal conflicts with a total disregard for even international politics, much less the concept of war crimes or any of that stuff. Zero concern. Zero. They're still in Georgia. Like, you want to talk about endless wars? We just got out of Afghanistan. The Russians are still in 5 countries on purpose, fighting actively. On the side, by the way, of the authoritarians, if they are not their own force in that country. We got to take a break. When we come back, we got more of your questions. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Due to budget and time.
The past wasn't that long ago.
Due to budget and time constraints, all the creativity has been removed from the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide Bumpers. Now welcome back to the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide.
Here I am like an idiot.
So welcome back to the show. You know,
Way to call me out like that.
Oh, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't even go
like an idiot.
I wouldn't talk about you
They don't like the gas.
or anybody in Chicago without their permission. So much to cover, and so many more questions. But I want to remind everybody that that Russia and Trump have one big thing in common. Both of them have zero friends. None. They have acquaintances, they have exes, they have hangers on, they have yes men and people who think that they can live, they can tick off this dog for until it runs out of blood. But friends, not so much. And I remember a time when Kazakhstan was actually very close to Russia, was the calmest satellite state, and then right before this war broke out, there was a weird political dust-up that happened there, and Russia rushed in to help them, as they are wont to do. And ever since then, Tokayev, the head of Kazakhstan, has been selling most of his oil and gas at a decent price to China and buddying up with Europe, going, we're with you guys when all this garbage is over. To the point where I'm seeing headlines like this one. Moscow announces end run around increasingly hostile Kazakhstan. That's not how this was supposed to go, Philip Ittner. This is not what was on the tin when they got it at the store. Right?
Yeah, well, it's the ego of Moscow to think that they actually were like loved and appreciated during the Soviet Union, whereas if you travel around the former Soviet Union satellite states, because at the end of the day, the center of gravity was always Moscow. If you go onto the various satellite states, I've been to the countries of the Caucasus. I've been to Central Asia. I've been to almost all the Central Asian countries. Actually, I've been to the Baltics, and almost everywhere you go, the vast majority hate Moscow because it's a vertical power structure. Everything gets drawn up to the capital because that's the center of gravity. That's the way they operate. That's the way their power operates. So if you go to like Kazakhstan, I went to Kazakhstan in the 90s, the late 90s, back when they were very much still under the thumb of Moscow. And even then, I would get this
they were just getting into grunge.
Yeah. So behind.
That's right. And they're just catching up on the Brady Bunch. But they, even back then, they would say how much they loathe. Also Kazakhstan had Baikonur, so there was that, and the Russians were Baikonur's their space center, and they would pollute the entire huge swaths of Kazakhstan would get polluted by jet fuel because their various stages of their launch Soyuz would just spray chemical.
Yes. So glad you brought that up.
Over.
So glad you brought that up. And you know why, Philip? You know why I feel it? Because it's a perfect window into the tanky Vatnik crowd and their support for these idiots. That now Moscow has announced that they are looking for new space partners, right? In Africa. That's right. They want to move their launch sites and the places where they do the kind of polluting they were doing in Kazakhstan and other satellite countries, they want to do that in Africa. They think the environmental standards and the need for money are, low and then strong enough in those countries that they can come down there and pollute the crap out of those places now. They're not doing it because we've worked out the kinks and we'd rather just launch our rockets from from where the trees are. It is fascinating to me that they're being driven out of their former satellite countries for being toxic to the environment, to the people, to everything, and their total disregard for environmental standards. And then they announce, we want to be partners with you, South America. We want to be partners with you, Africa. Oh, and even the Chinese are so terrible with their environmental standards that they didn't even put dams around their coal mines, which are now giant lakes of coal, sleuth, and just these giant black lakes of just toxins. And the Chinese won't let the Russians build a launch site in their country. That should tell you something.
They're making no secret that they are making a full court press into Africa. The Russians are. Mm-hmm. If you monitor their kind of negotiations and where they're putting their diplomatic efforts, it's Africa a little bit, as you mentioned, to Latin America as well, but Africa is big on their list. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because also having spent as much time as I have in Russia, they're actually, they claim to be partners with Africa because of this, like, we hate Western imperialism and what happened to Africa was awful. No, right. That's not true. Because if you actually listen to what they say about Africa, it's, and this is what I say. So I'm verging on something offensive here. So I'm going to be very careful, but they do this whole like, oh, good little black person from Africa will come and take care of you.
Yeah.
It's massive.
It's condescending.
Patronizing.
Yeah, right.
It's condescending. It's patronizing, and it is endemic. It is a perfect example of how they view power dynamics. You're going to be the good little satellite state, or the sort of vassal state that you just don't get aspirations of it, kind of self-determination, or we'll take care of you. It's so awful.
Well, it's by the way, might be one of the wedges. It might be one of the wedges between them and Russia, because them and China, because China does the exact same thing. China and Russia they have decided they're going to divide Africa up between themselves. And they've just decided neither one of us is telling the other which piece of the chicken they're getting. Both of them think they're getting drumsticks. And they haven't had discussions about this other than, hey, back off. Hey, back off. But that's it, and nobody's listening. One of the arguments you could make for why Prigozhin is allowed to do what he's doing and why he's so valuable to Putin as well is because of the Wagner shift to Africa and the necessary, that's right, elements, especially gold, that Russia has been funneling out of Africa right now. They have been stealing gold hand over fist, large truckloads of it, something that looks like...
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's
scenes from Indiana Jones, crates of this stuff.
Wagner's efforts in Africa, you're right, might be one of the contributing factors as to why he still draws breath.
Right. And they could be building Bug-Out Island with that money.
Maybe, yeah, absolutely, both of them in conjunction. They are old friends. But it's interesting you bring this up about the Chinese, and I will mention it about the Russians as well. Is that while Russia is a multi-ethnic country, and I know that so is China, although you're the expert on China, so I'll defer to you. But what I know about Russia is, while it is multi-ethnic, it's the Russians we're all equal in this multi-ethnic Russian Federation, but some of us are more equal than others.
Yes. The Han Chinese. That's the Han Chinese movement. The Han and China, there is the largest movement of racist singular dominance of a particular ethnic group in world history is happening currently. If you believe their numbers, the population numbers, that's another conversation for another time. But in terms of Han Chinese spread out through the entire country, wiping out the Cantonese, wiping out the Uyghurs, wiping out and it literally, remember the scene in Braveheart where like the problem with Scotland is it's full of Scots, and they did prima nocta and all that ideas that they were going to breed them out of existence. That was one king and his generals kind of come up with this idea to do it on a smaller scale in the kingdom. That's happening on a massive scale in China and has been for the last 5 years at least. And part of it is desperation for children, but the other half of it is desperation for children of a particular ethnic minority or majority in the country, at the expense of everyone else. It's gnarly. It's
part of the reason why this conflict is happening, because the Russians have treated the Ukrainians throughout their history, throughout the relationship and the shotgun marriage that has been the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. They've always treated Ukrainians as second-class citizens, and the Ukrainians being colonized were not for it. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on, Philip Ittner, at Philip Ittner, 1L, 2Ts. He'll soon be on Threads. We're all gathering there. Johnny Million is on there as well. So am I.
Yep.
And that's where the conversations will, again, move. We have a Discord associated with the show. If you want to become a Patreon subscriber, it's a great way to support the show and end up on the Discord. It's a great conversation, great group of people. And that's it. I'll see you guys on Monday on the next
Thanks, everyone.
on the morning show. We'll see you.
All right, that's a wrap. Bye, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Chicago.